This is going to be a normal cut down one to what I normally do, because it does go on. So this will be the first part, and if it's successful they might invite me back to finish the second part, which I'll take you up to the modern day, where I can explain what's going off at the colliery site now and the future that we're going to have out there. As you said, my name's Jim Davies. I went to Betsangor as a miner from leaving the school in '57, and I was there right till the very end. And I was actually the last miner in Kent, because I was supervising when they actually filled the hole in, and I finished in March 1990. So it was, it's a dear place in my heart. This is talk, it's like it said, it's called Invicta Miners. Part one, mainly based on Deal and Betsangor, because I normally give a talk around Kent, but just don't concentrate on these areas. It's more where they are. In 1846, the first suggestion that coal measures could be found in Kent. They'd been mining coal in Belgium and the Pas-de-Calais coalfields since the Middle Ages. In fact, that little area there supplied all of Europe with coal at one time. So they thought that there could be coal in this part of the UK. And you can see that the French coal measures are there, and then Kent there, so that they knew that there could be coal in that particular area. Now, there was a chap called Arthur Burr who bought all the concessions up, and they thought he was the saviour. He was given freedom of Dover and God knows what, but he turned out to be a bit of a fiddler, which I'll explain to you as it goes on. At that time, when he got involved, they'd just stopped digging the Channel Tunnel because there was feared of a French invasion. And so the government had stopped them. They'd got about 2,000 yards in or something like that. The engineer, a chap called Brady, they persuaded him to turn one of the boring machines on its head and drill down and look for coal. And the 1886, they sunk the first borehole at the base of Shakespeare Cliff in Dover. Coal measures were found at 1,000 feet, so they knew that coal was in this area of Kent. 1896, they started to sink what they called the Dover Colliery or the Shakespeare Colliery. Come on, start this modern technology. It should be kicking in at the moment. It's not doing it. But sorry.
Not running coal.
I know, that's it. But as I say, they started sinking these shafts at Shakespeare, and it was shaft sinking by the sinkers is a very, very dangerous job. And they, yeah, we missed that one. It's all right. It didn't kick in. But when they were sinking the shafts, there was, at one stage, there was 8 men killed. They were drowned because water had broken in. Now, this shows you the close proximity to the Shakespeare Tunnel, where the trains come out of. A large number of boreholes were sunk all over Kent, just to see what the situation was as regards coal. Now, they sunk all these boreholes all round this part of East Kent. So you can see it was peppered. And they found that there was nearly 10 billion, not million, 10 billion tons of workable seams in the East Kent area. And that didn't count the coal that went under the sea towards the Pas-de-Calais. And during our lifetime that the Kent coalfield worked, we've only mined about 100 million tons. So you can see how much coal is still underground there. Not only did they find coal, but they found 200 million tons of iron ore in the Dover area. With the results of the boreholes, they decided to have 18 collieries in Kent. Now, this area that we only ended up with, well, we ended up with 4 really, but these were the collieries that were going to be sunk in Kent. So you can see that it was going to be quite a big area. They had Shakespeare to start with, Snowdown, Tilmanston, Chislett, and finally Betsangor. Now, Shakespeare never produced any coal. Arthur Burr, what he did, he wanted people to invest in there, so he what we call salted the Shakespeare pit. That's, he put a load of coal wagons down the night before. Next day he got all the press there, and they brought them up, and he sold millions of shares, because they all thought it was going to be just like up towards the Midlands and that, there were going to be loads and loads of coal there. So that a hell of a lot of people invested and lost money in the Kent coalfield. The Kent coal turned out to be a very good coking coal. That right up until we finished producing coal, 1 tonne of Kent coal mixed with 9 tonne of, say, Nottingham or Yorkshire coal made a very good coking coal. And that's why it, Dorman Long, who was a steel making company, they took an interest, and they actually bought the mineral rights to Betsanger off Lord Northbourne. They bought Snowdown Colliery for £1 because it had already been going, but then it had been closed. And they all had an interest in what we would call Woodensborough Colliery, which never actually got off the ground, but they, Snowdown and Betsanger actually did. With a lack of experienced miners in this area at the time, they had to be recruited from all parts of the country because there wasn't many, you could say, local, well, there were no local miners at all. They came from Scotland, North East, Ireland, Lancashire, Yorkshire, Notts, Midlands, Wales, and Somerset. So all these chaps came from all over the country to this little area, and each one, like we can say Chisler, it was mainly a Welsh pit because that was owned by a firm called Powell Dufferin. Originally it was owned by a German company, but they were interned during the First World War, so they had to relinquish their rights, and a Welsh company took it over. Tilmanston was a lot of Somerset men, and Betsanger and Snowdown had more or less, you know, whatever was left. Who were these men? Well, the First World War was over, and they'd gone back to their place, to a home fit for heroes. And, of course, when they got there, there was unemployment. Thanks very much. There was unemployment and really down and out. And a lot of them had been tunnelling in the First World War. When they joined the colours, they found out that they were miners, so they got them tunnelling. And well, a lot of them said it was better than being in the trenches because they were dry. But the Germans were doing the same thing and tunnelling towards them to put explosives under. Well, these chaps who did survive, they went back to their valleys, to their industrial areas, but they were thrown on the scrap heap. So they was out of a job. There was a recession on up there. They couldn't sell the coal, but they could sell the Kent coal because it was close proximity to London and the continent. They had a ready-made market. Why did they come to this corner of the UK?
One time, mining was the valley's only industry. When Britain was unable to sell coal abroad, there was not enough work to keep the Rhondda pits open. So large numbers became unemployed. Poverty hit the miners and their families. For years there seemed no hope of building any kind of life in the valley. Many left and began life again in new jobs away from coal mining.
My father was part of that from Wales, where they came down here in the 30s, so was my colleague Jim, his family were. And it was repeated all over the place. They were the people that come into the area looking for work. How did they get here? Because they had no money. They couldn't be able to afford train fare or things like this. And this particular chap, who was actually my next door neighbour, he explains.
There's the boots, put his clogs on, big clogs, and walked through London in the big clogs until we got by Big Ben. And then the policeman pulled us up and asked if we were going and what we got in the cases. So about 12 o'clock at night, we had to open the cases on the Big Ben to show the police what we got in. They were astounded when we told them we'd walked from Yorkshire and went to Kent. They couldn't hardly believe it.
See, now he's explaining how he came from a place called Dinnington down to Kent to get a job. Now, he walked, some came by bike. A lot of Geordies came from Newcastle and came to Chatham and then walked to either any of the pits around here. So by all sorts of means, they came into this, this little corner of the UK. Now, with the prospects of jobs and better housing, overnight, East Kent became a boom area. And these people were bringing with them their communities, traders, churches, the sports. They all came into this, within a few years, this place had exploded with all these people coming into the area. The planned manpower, like I said, this is the 1925 report, the planned manpower with 18 pits was going to be 147,000 miners. That's miners, not families, miners. And steelworks, because I told you about the iron ore they found, there was going to be 48,000 steelworkers as well. So it was going to be very, well, very close. But there was a hell of a lot of hostilities locally, particularly in Deal, of these people coming into the area, because originally the sinkers, who were mainly Irish navvies, they were a rare breed. They were banned from every pub within 6 miles of Betsanger when they were sinking. And the locals thought, God, if these are like with just these men that are doing the sinking, what's it going to be like when everyone else comes? So there was a hell of a lot of hostility. This is Percy Davies, who was the mayor at the time. And I've taken these out of council records. And he said, asked every member of the council to vote against the people for providing houses for these people coming into the area. This is what I researched from the local Mercury, where it's got, this happened right up until the late 30s, nearly 40s, where they had a flat to let, no children or minors, not suitable for minors. And nearly every advert mentioned that they didn't want minors, so that's what they expected.
There's an unknown community of the miners, which southerners were rather, what are these northern people going to come and take over? And they resented these people coming here and perhaps getting on our seafront, taking our place. I, as a schoolgirl, was told, oh, well, you mustn't go up in the area where they live, there'll be bad language spoken, this sort of thing. This was a wrong view entirely. I mean, I don't agree with this at all, but this was the feeling of so many of these people who considered themselves the upper class in those days, of so much class distinction.
So you can see this, this was the sort of thing that to expect when the chaps come. Now this particular gentleman here, I knew quite well. His name was Billy Marshall. He was the first Labour councillor on Deal Council, and he was a lone voice, and he pioneered and pioneered to get Mill Hill, the community up Mill Hill. And I find it sad that all the people that voted against, they've all had roads named after them up there, but poor old Bill has not got anything named after it at all, but I think we'll end up with something. But Billy was, he was the trade union leader.
First ever came into Kent with the sinkers, who were migrant workers, who used to sort of bivouac out near the pit. And they were a very hard group of men, as you can understand, with a job which in fact did take a heavy toll in life and limb. And they had a certain tendency towards drink and sort of fighting and generally sort of hard living. They'd sink a coalfield and then move on to the next. And so the quiet little fishing town of Deal was suddenly confronted with these outsiders. And this, to some extent, carried on when the miners came from the other coalfields into Kent to actually man up the pits. And there was really a system virtually of a social apartheid. There's many stories, even up until after the Second World War, where people would try to get lodgings, and once it was discovered that there was a miner involved, then they'd be told they weren't available. And one old friend of mine actually brought me a newspaper which he kept, and he showed me this little advert, and it said, lodgings lodgings to let, minors need not apply. And there's stories of pubs, for instance, where no dogs or minors allowed. And I think that has created a certain resentment amongst the community that they've been treated in this way. And one of the offshoots of that was that, particularly when you had the development like Elsham, with a pit village, with people coming in from many different areas, from Scotland, from Yorkshire, from many different areas, ostracised by the local community, that they turned inwards and created a community life because there was very little to offer on the outside. It was the miners that really introduced any culture into East Kent, because if you look around, you'll find that the brass bands and the silver bands and the horticultural societies and a lot of the cultural life of the area actually originated with the miners. And if you look at the clubs in the area, you'll still often find it's the miners which are the sort of man the committees and in fact are the stalwarts that are keeping a lot of community life going.
My first Saturday evening in Deal, I saw two of them stripped to the waist, fighting bare fist in the churchyard, in St. George's churchyard. Well, that horrified me. If he did that to me, what would he do to the native?
That's Billy I was telling you about. He was quite a character, and he was telling it as it was in that particular time. Now, this, with the 1925 report, this was Sir Patrick's Abercrombie proposed new towns. And you can see where the dwellings, there was going to be 8,000 at Chislett, 13 at Littlebourne, Wingham, 27,500, because that was going to serve a number of pits. Ham, 36, Woodensborough, 12,000, Nonnington. But the biggest shock of all was when I was giving the talk at St Margaret's and they found that they were going to end up with 20,000 miners living there, which didn't go down very well. But anyway, this didn't come to fruition, so that is what was actually proposed. Now this is the bloke, he's Sir Patrick Abercrombie, a very, very well-known planner. In fact, he rebuilt London after the Blitz. But in 1925, he came and, because this was going to be a really big thing, because Neville Chamberlain actually gave an address at Canterbury Cathedral, explaining that not for the people to be worried, because it was going to become a new black country here. But he had great vision, this chap. He knew where the miners came from and what their conditions were like when they went and they came from them sort of things. These was huts. This should be a film that's running, but it's not for some reason. But he did not want the collieries, the housing built on top of the collieries where you rolled out of bed and you went straight down the pit like this here. He wanted the townships to be away from the colliery, like you had Elsham, which was about 3 miles away from Snowdown Colliery, Hurston, about a mile from Chislett, Tilmanston at Elwington, which was about a mile, and then Mill Hill, which is, you can say, 3 miles. So he wanted the workplace away from the collieries. Now, with all these miners coming in, they brought their children with them. And they all came with different dialects. Now, you can imagine, in fact, my sisters, they still had a Welsh, although born in Wales, they still had a Welsh dialect when they were quite old. So they all kept it.
At the colliery at that time, there was a wide and varied diversity of dialects. There was a large proportion of Scots, some Welsh people, Derbyshire, one family of Cornish people, I think, Lancastrians, so that the children, when I first came here, were the sons and daughters of the original settlers, as it were. And so we had a rich diversity of accents in the classroom. I think the greatest difficulty we had in understanding was entirely the Scots.
I think the trouble was, whatever was brought up in Scotland, most of them was born down here, but whatever was born in Scotland, when they came down here and went into the sweet shop, it was a terrible job, you know. For the shopkeeper to understand what they really wanted.
So what happened?
They used to come home crying. He didn't know what I want, Mum. You know? If the kiddies went out playing any time, when they come home, in for the tea at bedtime, you could always tell whose kiddies they were playing with, you know, the Blanks and Yorkshire and Welsh, and the kiddies used to copy one another. It was very embarrassing when you went in, you know.
Whoops, I didn't stop it there. It went on a bit there, but it was just explaining how, and that was Huey, who was one of the chaps I first worked with. He was an old man then, but he came down as a youngster, and he still had a broad Scottish accent, and he was saying what it was like then. But on the thing that I was going to show there, if the film had run, the children were in a shop, and it was a well-known shop adjacent to the colliery called Jones's. And if you were getting to work a little bit late, then you'd go in there and ask them to make you a sandwich for your, what we call snap time, the lunch break. And on there, and you could see it, there's a bacon slicer, where they used to slice the ham up. But before they sliced the ham up, they had to kick the cat off it, because that's where the cat slept. And I'll tell you what, am I right, Les? You're here somewhere? That, bloody good ham sandwiches they were. At first, there was no pithead bars, and all these men used to come home from the pit. They couldn't get on public transport, so they used to ride home in coal lorries, bikes, walk, anything. They weren't welcome in pubs to get a drink, so that's how they used to come home. And you can imagine these chaps walking towards you when they're all in their, what we term as in their pit black. In fact, there's a tale that's told. There are two old ladies who came from somewhere like Croydon, and they used to come to Deal for a holiday. And when they got back home, someone said to them, "Where have you been?" They said, "Oh, we've been to Deal." What's it? "Oh, it's a lovely little seaside town. It's beautiful down there. But I've never seen so many chimney sweeps in my life." So what the chaps used to do, they used to come home, and they used to have the bath in front of the fire with, well, the wife helping them to fill the bath out. That's okay when it's the husband, but some of them had as many as 6 or 8 sons. So you can imagine the last one there, he'd end up blacker than what he was, because they were. But the miners' welfare, they had money stopped, a penny a tonne was taken off their wages, and they built the canteen and the pithead bars, which was really, really fantastic. You know, when you come up the pit, and then you can have a bath. It's really, really good. This is another film that's not run, but this is just showing you what I always thought was quite comical. When the men, when you come up the pit, you didn't wash your own back, because you could get to it, because you were black from head to toe. So the person next to you washed your back, and you could have a line of men, about a dozen of them, all washing one another's back. And I did have a film there, but it's not running at the moment. As the workforce grew, buses were introduced, and they used to run to each of the collieries, because like I said, that they were a little bit far away from the collieries. In Deal, we had a bloke called Harry Tomset who used to deliver coal, and then he used to deliver it in that bus, and that company is still going today, because he was, well, they used to run all the pit buses. This is about 1937, when they're all lined up, because in 37 you had nearly 3,000 men working at Betsanger alone, so you can imagine the logistics of getting these people home and away and whatnot. Now, with an annual estimated output of 13 million tonnes, a seaport had to be established. They considered 7, but Dover was the first one, then Deal, and then Richborough. Now you would straight away think Dover's the best place, but with Dover you've got a very short distance between the cliffs and the sea, so there's no room for marshalling yards, because we're talking about 13 million tonne going out, and there's no turn, so that didn't come into the equation, but this did.
Looking towards the good heavens the other day down in Kent, our cameraman espied a remarkable aerial ropeway. It's used for conveying coal direct from a colliery to Dover Harbour. And here are the buckets passing the central powerhouse that drives the whole system. Each bucket carries nearly a ton, and there are about 600 buckets on the move. 120 tons of coal can be transported every hour. The ropeway is nearing the cliff edge. After doing a steady 4.5 miles an hour over the cliffs, the procession of loaded buckets enters a quarter-mile tunnel from which it emerges in Dover Harbour. The end of the ropeway is actually on Dover Pier. There the buckets are automatically emptied into huge bunkers and given a friendly push-off on a return journey of 7.5 miles.
Now that coal came from Tilmanston Colliery, and that was the brainchild of Richard Tilden Smith, who owned Tilmanston Colliery at the time. And unfortunately, he never saw it come into being because he dropped dead on the House of Commons steps in 1929, I think it was, just before that came in. That worked up to about 1938, and then it was taken down in about 47 and sold to India. So to this day and age, it may still be running. But this is what East Kent was going to be like, because you can see there was having power stations, there was Tilmanston Colliery, briquettes, brickworks, iron ore mines, cement works, chalk pits, all going down into Dover Harbour in the bottom right-hand corner there. So you can see the plans, it was going to be quite a large place. At that time and all, you had Colonel Stevenson, who had, well, what was known as the East Kent Light Railway, operating from Shepherd's Well there, and he was going to cover all the coalfield right through. They even had a line there going across Manston by the aerodrome, and most of them was leading to Richborough, because that's where they were going to ship the coal out. This shows you what Richborough, I heard you mention about Richborough Castle early on. Well, this is what Richborough actually looked like. In 1919, it employed 20,000 men. There was a hell of a lot of men working there. It was the very first roll-on, roll-off ferry in Great Britain. And this is during the First World War, where they were shipping all the armaments out to the Somme and all around there. It was all going through Richborough. As I said, it was the first roll-on, roll-off ferry, and they was taking all the armaments out there and then bringing them back a bit later. This shows you what we know as the Pfizer site, and you had the wharf along there with all the barges that are quite common in France. You got Stonor Lake there, and all these were the army barracks emplacements. Here's one of the ships that sailed across. You can see the actual engines, the trains on the ferry, ready to go out. Now, Betsanger Colliery was started sinking in 1924 and actually closed on 25th of August 1989. The shaft depths were, number one shaft was 2,500 feet, and number two was 2,700 feet. This one was 2,000, you can see it up there now. They weren't the deepest. The deepest was Snowdown Colliery that went over, and Tilmanston, that went over well over 3,000 feet. So you can see what depths that they were down at. This is the sort of seam section at Betsanger. You had 14 seams, and we worked the number 7 seam up until 1960, and then because we had problems controlling the roof and selling the coal, we went into what we called the 1900 seam, the number 6 seam, and that was working right to the very end. And that proved very, very profitable, that particular seam. Now, a lot of you may be interested because this is the number 6 seam, the layout, and you can see where over there is Eastry, that's Sandwich up there, you've got Woodensborough there, and these are all the coal faces going towards Worth, that's Worth there. You've got Deal in the bottom corner here, And so that's all the golf links and everything there. The number of people that tell me, oh yeah, we worked under the sea. None of the pits went under the sea. The closest we went to there would be the Royal Cinque Ports Golf Club. So that is the sort of area that we covered. And you can imagine that that distance there would be about 4 miles. That was the pit bottom there. So we had to get men and materials in and coal out all that distance all the way through. We had underground locomotives, just like they've got on the London Underground. At the end, we were all more or less computer controlled. It was a very, very modern pit when we finished. During the war, Betsanger got hit about 4 times. On this particular instance, there was 2 men killed, and there was, I think it was 600 men trapped underground for 24 hours. But they did get them out in the end. And also, they transferred the men to the other pits to keep working, but they did have a skeleton staff that actually carried on working with no ventilation during that time. Right, the community. Like I said, that the Abercrombie wanted the communities away from the pit. Well, in particular, Betsanger. This is the Mill Hill community, which was well, part of the setup. Now, we had a welfare organisation. Every colliery had a welfare organisation for past sports and pastimes for the pit. Now, Betsanger were the biggest in the country. It's all right if you belong to a particular club and you know what problems you have running that particular club, be it the bowls, cricket, gardening. You think of this when we run all them. And there's a man sat over there who was the secretary, and he had all this under his control, and believe you me, it was no easy thing, because when you go through that lot, and everyone's got their own ideas, thinking someone else is doing better than them, but we were the strongest, and we used to operate all over Kent with our rugby, cricket, bowls, football. We used to go even on the continent. This actually is Snowdown, and you can see the headgear in the background, and this is played on their welfare ground. Then you've got the brass bands. Every colliery in Kent had a brass band. This was taken on the centenary, and it was in St George's Church. They did a concert there. This is Snowdown Male Voice Choir. Both of them bands and the choir are still operating to this day, although they're getting older with the Snowdown Choir and looking for new members all the time. They've even got a woman's choir now that's quite successful, so still carrying on now. This is the new complex up the hill. I don't know whether any of you have been there, but in Mill Hill we've got 15 acres of ground. We call it the welfare ground, where we used to play rugby, we play cricket, soccer, and this is the bowls. And that long building in the background, that is 4 rinks of indoor, the latest modern bowls you can get. So you're quite welcome any time to go up there and have a look. It's our best kept secret, I think, so far, because everyone keeps saying, I never knew this existed. Each of the collieries had their own football team, which was, when they played one another, it was quite a thing. They had their own galas, where they had things like the tug-of-war team, which was quite a prestigious event. We had a fantastic first aid team. That is the bowl for the national that they won. These chaps were really top at their job. In fact, one of the blokes there is Oscar Spears, who was a town mayor. So these chaps were brilliant at what they were doing. Well, they had to be by virtue of the accidents that we were having at the pit. This isn't running again.
Coal dust filled wounds to leave blue scars for life. and clogged the miners' lungs. Few underground workers ended their working lives
It's
in
supposed to
full
be a
health.
movie, but it's not beginning. But now, Betsanger Colliery worked from 1924 to 1989, and we had a total of 68 miners who lost their lives in Betsanger alone. That is, part of it is on that waiting miners statue, because we built that as we had that as a memorial. Mining communities had a tradition of looking after the young and the old. We used to personally take the retired miners out on outings during the summer, and in the winter used to put cabarets on there, and then go back to their houses with them afterwards, just to make sure everything was okay, that there'd been no problems while they was away. We even looked after the kiddie sports. That was a real highlight of the, there you can see all these children enjoying themselves there. Churches, we were quite religious people. There's the amount of churches that we had in Mill Hill. We still have most of them anyhow. So there were 6 covering that area. Now, one that I come to quite important is Our Ladies, because they were very, very important to the mining community. Because when they came here, a lot of them, and I had never understood the word, but they were in service. And I soon found out later what it was. They were in the big houses where my mother in particular was in Weston-super-Mare, came from the valleys at 12-year-old, and they were put in as domestic servants, and it was like slavery. And when they got to about 17, then they were sent back to the industrial areas and the valleys and whatnot. But that's how they were working, more or less 24 hours a day. And with no pithead baths, then the men would come home, and the women used to have to dry the clothes because they were mainly soaked with sweat. So that is the sort of thing that
when husbands and sons arrived back from work, the women were expected to have hot food on the table and hot water to wash in. This was further complicated if the men in the house worked different shifts.
If you had a... So he's explaining where the women's job was about 24/7, because they'd get up for the day shift, see the night shift home, afternoon shift going, day shift home, and then afternoon shift home and night shift. So in my family alone, there was 4 of us at the pit, and so my mother was on the go constantly. These were, up until the 50s, these were the women, mainly in Lancashire, working on the pit surface. Because in 1842 they passed a law where no women or children under 10 could work underground. And they used to have the screens, and that's a terrible job, that was. Now this is a particular Mill Hill family, it's Woodcocks, and there was old Harry Woodcock and his wife, and the 6 sons, who all worked at Betsanger, and all be on different shifts, so you can imagine Mrs. Woodcock had a hell of a lot to put up with. And then we had the days before the National Health.
Some employers ran health insurance schemes that did extend cover to dependent wives and children. The job that Janet Dunn's father had found was in the newly developed Kent coalfield, and it came with a tied house and health insurance for the whole family.
The benefit, of course, would mean that if you become ill, I had a sister who broke her arm and another sister who dislocated her shoulder and so on, things that happened, you would be taken into Canterbury Hospital, and that covered that. And also, I suppose, it paid for the local doctor.
But the benefits for Janet's family would be short-lived. Working conditions in the mines were notoriously tough.
The Kent coalfields were very, very deep and hot, and the men used to describe it as Dante's Inferno. It was really dreadful. A lot of people who came only did the 1 shift, they collapsed and were brought out and didn't go back again.
The harsh conditions meant that disputes were common, and Janet's father was sacked after going on strike. The family was evicted, and their entitlement to health insurance soon ran out. Her parents had to find other ways to manage.
Dad was wonderful in his little remedies. I remember my little brother, John, when he was very ill, Dad used to go to the pub and bring a little miniature brandy back and put a little teaspoonful in with a white of an egg and some sugar. And we were all fascinated with this. We said, well, that smells lovely, it looks lovely. And he used to just spoon this gently to little John.
But Janet's mother became seriously ill during another pregnancy, and it was then that the consequences really hit home.
Mother had preeclampsia. It's a very serious complication of pregnancy. So Mum expected, of course, to be taken into Canterbury Hospital. And she was amazed when they said, oh no, you don't go to Canterbury Hospital. She said, why? And they said, well, your husband doesn't pay to Canterbury Hospital now. Because he's unemployed, you're not paying. So you have to go to Etchin Hill, to what was really the poorhouse. And she said, well, I refuse, I won't go. She did refuse to go. Dad and I, between us, we nursed her and looked after her. She came through, but the baby was stillborn.
The hard economic circumstances that Janet's family found themselves in were by no means uncommon. Britain was experiencing the worst depression of its industrial history. Unemployment reached 25%, and many people found themselves in and out of work with little warning.
So that gives you an idea what it was, well, some would know before the National Health. The women were great supporters of the men when there were disputes on, where they would go. This is when 160 was got laid off, and they used to help with the soup kitchens. They also used to get involved when any of our local clubs in our welfare had a presentation evening or something, and they would all stand in as waitresses, so they would all be heavily involved within the community. It's like Malcolm Pitt said with the attitude of the people, the communities grew inwards and they were self-supporting. That's actually my mother doing our rugby shirts in when we used to run about 4 or 5 rugby teams. So some miners got involved in local politics. We had the first Labour mayor was a chap called George Daughtry. Haven't got his photo yet. Also included was the bloke, the manager's clerk was Eric Ferris. He was a mayor. Then Oscar Spears was. And finally Roy Towe. They were chaps who actually employed at the colliery, and then they were involved in the pit. So that's the end of the first talk where I was splitting it up. If you're invited back, then I will. But anyway, thank you very much. Any questions?
Vicky? I have to do that, you see, and then George knows it's me. Is there any record of the Kent mines having pit ponies? And
Yes, they had pit ponies at the 3 other pits. The latest ones up until they got rid of 1950 was at Chisler. We never had any at Betsanker, but they did at Snowdown and Chisler.
What happened to the ponies after the pits were closed? Or, after the ponies stopped?
Well, they would get them up, and then I suppose if people bought them, then they bought them. I know up the north of the country there was a pit pony preservation site, but they did look after the ponies when they did come out. So they were very, very well kept. My dad was telling me he had one in Wales, and woe betide if you worked that horse, you were expendable. The horses weren't, and the horses were treated far better than what the men were.
Yes, I'd heard that. Yes, thank you.
That is true.
Over here. Can I ask you about the sculpture that's on the entrance to the old entrance of the Best Hanger?
Right, first of all, that was built, I think it was modelled on a chap called Davies, and it was for Ferry Bridge Power Station up Callingly Colliery. Then, when the Central Generating Electricity Board, it was brought down to Ridgeborough, and it was put at Ridgeborough when they were burning coal. When they finished burning coal, it was taken to Dover Seafront, in front of the old NCB offices down there. And then there was a campaign that a lot of us got involved in, and we actually got it put in front of the country park. And what it was, it took us 10 years, Jim, about researching the men who got killed at the pit. We couldn't get any official records. We went to them all, the coroner, the inspector of mines, the lot. And how we did it, we went to the libraries, went on the microfiche, and we studied and studied and studied. And we've ended up with about 278 names. There are some still missing, we know that, but we're going to renew the plinth on the site because we've got it as a memorial to the men who lost their lives during the Kent coalfield. Sir?
How long would it take you to get from the pit head down to the furthest working place?
Let me see, because what we did, we had, there was quite a few men working there, and we had what we call a draw system, where you started, say, a day shift. It started at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you went down on the first draw, because you continually go down until 6:30. Then you'd get on what we call the paddy, the train. Then you'd go right to the bottom of the face and then walk in. So from 6 o'clock, where you'd be hanging about, I would say around about 10 to 8, when we actually got to the coal face, around about that time.
You don't include in your working day?
Yeah, and then somehow you got out quicker. No work that out. when it came what we call knock-off, it was a hell of a lot quicker.
How often did he come back up to the surface then? If you
Sorry?
Ship? How long was your ship and how long did he... How many
it was 7¼ hours last off. When I first went there, I think it was 8. But it was 7¼ hours, and you'd start winding back up at 1:45.
But you would sit down for the 7½ hours?
Oh, you'd be working, you'd be in the coal face miles away. It's not just, a lot of people think you just got off the cage and then dug the coal, but you didn't, because as the faces were advancing, you went further and further and further.
So it's not in Bagstown there, you just pick it up and bring it up there?
Not the last time I was there. But it's progress, you never know what happens.
When the mine was going over the sea start, of course, always thought the mines, Kentish mines, were mined under the sea.
No, none of them did. None of them. Not even Shakespeare, that was built on the seafront, because that just went down. They didn't have any faces going in. But none of the faces went on the sea.
What's going to work in the iron ore seams?
They were going to. When they closed Shakespeare Colliery, that's where they were going to work the iron ore from. But that was 1914, and you know we had a little bit of skirmish in 14, so it never got developed. So it was planned to work from Shakespeare Colliery.
I have a question. The 1842 Act that meant that women weren't allowed to work underground, was that ever repealed? Was it still in place when the mines closed?
Yeah, the women do work underground now. They're mainly engineers. Well, they don't in England, in Great Britain, because there's no mines now. But they did go down, so they must have had some sort of repeal that done it. But there was none of them, not like in America where you had the women miners, there was none of them working in the British coalfields. During our time there, we had a thing that we missed. We get-togethers about once a week and have coffee. I know it sounds a bit modern now, but that's what we do. And we had the characters. And up there saying there was no exception. You can go on about the characters, but there was one they were telling me. There was a chap called Tim Regan, who was a sinker and a very famous strongman, but typical Irish chap. And there was Lank Evans, and this Lank was a bit of a... Well, during the early 30s, when they couldn't get jobs, it wasn't because you'd go to the pit and they say, no, we don't want you today. You know, and it was like the dockers. You'd go and they send you home if they weren't well. Anyway, they were getting a bit fed up, and they seen that Lady Northbourne was advertising for 2 footmen. So they thought they'd apply. So they turned up there, said, right, I'll interview you, and ask them their name, age, how long they'd worked, and then certain other questions. Anyway, he came, she said, well, look, she said, we'll be at the House of Lords, and you'll be expected to wear a kilt. So she said, you got the job, you know, but I've just got to check a few things. So she said, so when you're wearing this kilt, have a look at your knees and all that. So look up, yeah, that's perfect. And then she said, will you show me your credentials? Well, if Tim hadn't been that thick, they would have got that job.